I'm particularly proud of the fact that one of my students fired Sam Altman.
Professor Hinton, can you please elaborate on your comment earlier on the call about Sam Altman?
So OpenAI was set up with a big emphasis on safety. Its primary objective was to develop artificial general intelligence and ensure that it was safe. One of my former students, Ilya, was the chief scientist. And over time, it turned out that Sam Altman was much less concerned with safety than with profits. And I think that's unfortunate.
My honor and great pleasure to introduce University Professor Emeritus Geoffrey Hinton, 2024 Nobel Laureate in Physics. Professor Hinton, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm still slightly in shock. I got a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning in California. I thought about whether I should answer it or not, and luckily I decided I would see who was calling. And I was extremely surprised to get the Nobel Prize in Physics. I never expected that. I think of the prize as a recognition of a large community of people who worked on neural networks for many years before they worked really well. I'd particularly like to acknowledge my two main mentors, David Rumelhart, with whom I worked on the backpropagation algorithm. David died of a nasty brain disease quite young, but for that, he would be here instead of me. And my colleague Terry Sinofsky, who I worked with a lot in the 1980s on Boltzmann machines, and who taught me a lot about the brain. I'd also like to acknowledge my students. I was particularly fortunate to have many very clever students, much cleverer than me, who actually made things work. They've gone on to do great things. I'm particularly proud of the fact that one of my students fired Sam Altman. And I think I better leave it there and leave it for questions.
Thank you so much, Jeff. We will now take questions from members of the media, and I invite my colleague, Lisa Perez from U of T's Media Relations team to moderate our Q&A. Lisa.
Well, we're taking a minute. I'd like to say I should also acknowledge Joshua Benjo and Yann, who were close colleagues and were very instrumental in developing this whole field.
We see a question in our Q&A box from Adrian at CTV National News. Adrian, if you wouldn't mind typing in your question, that would help us answer it. Thank you so much, Adrian. This is a question for Dr. Hinton. Dr. Hinton, what do you believe your legacy will be when it comes to AI?
I'm hoping AI will lead to tremendous benefits, to tremendous increases in productivity, and to a better life for everybody. I'm convinced that it will do that in healthcare. My worry is that it may also lead to bad things. And in particular, when we get things more intelligent than ourselves, no one really knows whether we're going to be able to control them.
Our next question comes from Victoria Gibson at Toronto Star. This is another one for Dr. Hinton. She asks, how would you use a neural network right now to improve Toronto as a city?
I'm not quite sure how a neural network could get rid of Doug Ford.
Okay, I've got a follow-up from Victoria again at Toronto Star. She asks again of Dr. Hinton, how is the Canadian research landscape different now from when you were starting out? And what is the biggest hurdle to reaching more research breakthroughs in Canada today?
Let me just think about that. Obviously, a big difference is people now recognize that neural networks actually work. But much of the landscape's similar. So there's an organization called the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research that is a big help for people doing research in areas where Canada's strong. I think the main thing about Canada as a place to do research is there isn't as much money as there is in the US, but it uses its money quite wisely. In particular, the main funding council for this kind of research, called NSERC, uses money for basic curiosity-driven research. And all of these advances in neural networks came out of basic curiosity-driven research, not out of throwing money at applied problems, but out of letting scientists follow their curiosity to try and understand things. And Canada is quite good at that.
Sam Ahmed at Agence France Presse. They say, congratulations. Both you and Dr. Hopefield have warned of the dangers of unchecked AI and not understanding enough about how it now works. How do we avoid catastrophic scenarios?
We don't know how to avoid them all at present. That's why we urgently need more research. So I'm advocating that our best young researchers, or many of them, should work on AI safety, and governments should force the large companies to provide the computational facilities that they need to do that.
Our next one is from Tara Deschamps from Canadian Press, again for Professor Hinton. She asks, for a long time, AI was not seen as a sexy or popular technology like it is today. I wonder if you could share a bit of what it was like to work on the underpinnings of the technology before it was so ubiquitous.
It was a lot of fun doing the research, but it was slightly annoying that many people said, in fact, most people in the field of AI said that neural networks would never work. They were very confident that these things were just a waste of time and we would never be able to learn complicated things, like, for example, understanding natural language using neural networks. And they were wrong.
The next question comes from Adrian Gabriel at CTV News. This is his second question. He asks of Dr. Hinton, can you elaborate on your concerns around AI? Do you believe it might become more intelligent than humans? Why and how quickly do you believe that could take place?
Okay, so most of the top researchers I know believe that AI will become more intelligent than people. They vary on the timescales. A lot of them believe that that will happen sometime in the next 20 years. Some of them believe it will happen sooner. Some of them believe it will take much longer. But quite a few good researchers believe that sometime in the next 20 years, AI will become more intelligent than us. And we need to think hard about what happens then.
We don't have the name of the next person who has asked a question, but they do have a fun one. Who was your first call when you discovered you'd won the Nobel Prize?
My sister in Australia.
Follow up to that, what was the reaction?
I think she said something like, "Oh my God."
Our next one is a follow-up question from Tara Deschamps. Again, she's from Canadian Press, and she asks of Professor Hinton, you initially mentioned being flabbergasted when you got the news of the Nobel win this morning. Can you tell us a bit about how your day has gone since?
Yes, I have very little sleep. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'd probably had about an hour's sleep by the time the phone went. I'm in California. And since then, I probably had about 1 more hour's sleep. So I'm rather sleep deprived now. And it's just been lots and lots of people trying to get in touch with me, but also lots of messages from old friends from years ago I haven't seen in a long time. And that's been very nice.
Our next question comes from Isabel Kirkwood at BetaKit, again for Professor Hinton. She asks, Professor Hinton, how do you reconcile receiving this recognition with your outspokenness about the need to slow AI advancement and the risks the technology poses?
I've never recommended slowing the advancement of AI because I don't think that's feasible. AI has so many good effects like in healthcare, but in pretty much all industries, that I think there's no chance of us slowing the development of it. So can you say the second half of the question again?
Absolutely. She asks, how do you reconcile receiving this recognition with your outspokenness about the need to slow AI advancement and the risks the technology poses?
Okay, so actually the Nobel Committee recognized that my work on talking about safety was relevant here. I can't remember exactly what they said, but they said something about that. I think we need a serious effort to make sure it's safe, because if we can keep it safe, it'll be wonderful.
We have a follow-up, again from Professor Hinton, and again from Issam Ahmed from AFP, who asks, do you think students and even professionals over-relying on LLMs is going to have a dumbing down effect, or will we operate on a higher order?
I don't think it will have a significant dumbing down effect. I think it'll be like what happened when they first had pocket calculators and people said, oh, kids won't learn math anymore. They won't be able to do multiplication. Well, you don't need to be able to do multiplication if you've got a pocket calculator. And I think it'll be the same with LLMs. People maybe won't remember as many facts that you can just ask an LLM and it will know. But I think it'll make people smarter, not dumber.
Thank you. A follow-up from Adrian Gabriel at CTV News. He asks, if I could ask one more question. He says, you used the word flabbergasted when you learned about the award. Why were you so surprised?
I had absolutely no idea that I've even been nominated. I'm not a physicist. I have very high respect for physics. I dropped out of physics after my first year at university because I couldn't do the complicated math. So getting an award in physics was very surprising to me. I'm very pleased that the Nobel Committee recognized that there's been huge progress in the area of artificial neural nets. And Hopfield's work was closely related to physics. And some of the early work I did with Terry Sinofsky on Boltzmann machines was inspired by statistical physics. But more recently, the work has had less relationship to physics. And so I was very surprised that I got a prize in physics.
Our next question comes from Matt O'Brien at Associated Press, who asks of Professor Hinton, can you please elaborate on your comment earlier on the call about Sam Altman?
So OpenAI was set up with a big emphasis on safety. Its primary objective was to develop artificial general intelligence and ensure that it was safe. One of my former students, Ilya, was the chief scientist. And over time, it turned out that Sam Altman was much less concerned with safety than with profits. And I think that's unfortunate.
She asks, you mentioned the uncertain future around AI and the need for greater understanding of its potential opportunities and risks. Do you believe governments look at stepping in to regulate AI more strictly? How can governments better support AI research?
I think governments can encourage the big companies to spend more of their resources on safety research. So at present, almost all of the resources go into making the models better, so they can have shiny new models. And there's a big competition going on, and the models are getting much better, and that's good. But we need to accompany that with a comparable effort on AI safety. The effort needs to be more than like 1%. It needs to be like maybe a third of the effort goes into AI safety, because if this stuff becomes unsafe, that's extremely bad.
Our next question is from Tara Deschamps again from CP. She asks of Professor Hinton, any plans for the money that comes with the Nobel yet?
No specific plans. I'm going to give it away to charities, but I know one charity I'll give some to, which provides jobs for neurodiverse young adults. I will give it to some other charities, but I don't know which yet.
Our next question for Professor Hinton, again, is from Wa Lone of Reuters, who asks, do you have any recommendations for how to prevent serious consequences in the future? By that, they mean how people should be careful of AI and its use. As you warned, it can be dangerous.
I don't think individual people being careful in how they use it is going to solve the problems. I think the people developing AI need to be careful how they develop it. And I think research needs to be done in the big companies which have the resources. I'm not convinced that the way individual people use it is going to make much difference.
They ask, I know you said it's hard to predict what going bad might mean, but if you had to hazard a stab at some rough areas of concern, what would those be?
So there are many different risks from AI, and they all have different solutions. So immediate risks are things like fake videos corrupting elections. We've already seen politicians either accuse other people of using fake videos or use fake videos themselves and fake images. So that's one immediate danger. There's also very immediate dangers from things like cyber attacks. So last year, for example, there was a 1,200% increase in the number of phishing attacks. And that's because these large language models make it very easy to do phishing attacks. And you can no longer recognize them by the fact the spelling's wrong and the syntax is slightly odd. Their English is perfect.
Next question comes from Victoria Gibson. Again, she's at Toronto Star. And she asks of Professor Hinton, you've spoken a few times today about the provincial government and the Ontario Science Centre. Why is that top of mind as you receive this recognition?
So the Ontario Science Centre was very important in encouraging curiosity in young minds and curiosity about science. It had some problems with the roof and it needed some renovation. The estimate for the renovation was $200 million. But the government then told the people who estimated how much it would cost to multiply that by 1.85 in order to get a much bigger number so that they could then justify knocking it down. And the reasons it was knocked down were not the reasons the government gave, as far as I can see. It could have been repaired, and it would have been much cheaper to repair it.
Next is another question from Tara Deschamps at Canadian Press for Professor Hinton. She says, when people talk about the AI and technology landscape in Canada, your name always comes up as an example of what Canada can achieve. But people also say the country has to be careful not to squander the opportunities you've created. What do you think Canada can do to hold on to its status as a major player in the AI space?
It can keep funding curiosity-driven basic research. That's very important for keeping the best researchers here. But in this age of artificial neural networks, we also need significant computational resources to keep researchers in universities. And the government is trying to do something about that. They set aside $2 billion for computational resources for AI research. So I think they're doing what they can. Obviously, we're a much smaller country than China or the United States. But given the resources they have, I think Canada is doing quite well.
Our next question comes from U of T News's very own Rahul Kalvapelli, who asks of Professor Hinton, you persisted with research in artificial neural networks, even during periods of waning interest in the topic among the scientific community. Do you have a message for professors and students about persisting with endeavors that may be deemed unpopular or futile?
I think my message is this. If you believe in something, don't give up on it until you understand why that belief is wrong. Often you believe in things and you eventually figure out why that's a wrong thing to believe in. But so long as
newspaper, they ask, when will AI surpass human capabilities? What will happen as a result?
So nobody knows when, but most of the good researchers I know think it will happen. My guess is it'll probably happen sometime between 5 and 20 years from now. It might be longer. There's a very small chance it'll be sooner. And we don't know what's going to happen then. So if you look around, there are very few examples of more intelligent things being controlled by less intelligent things, which makes you wonder whether when AI gets smarter than us, it's going to take over control.
Thank you for Professor Hinton. We no longer see any other questions.